On a quiet morning, a weary old man opened his gate to a trembling stray dog that refused to leave. Its eyes filled with purpose, not fear. When he followed the dog's silent lead, what he uncovered didn't just change his life, it unraveled a secret buried deep within the town. Why did this forgotten animal come to him, and what truth was it carrying? On a cold and cloudy morning, as the town's most talked about trial was about to reach its final arguments, the courtroom was packed wall to wall, people leaning forward in their seats, reporters scribbling quickly, and the judge calmly observing the tension in the air. Judge Martha Campbell, known for her stern demeanor and sharp eye for justice, sat behind the bench, with her gavel ready to strike at the slightest disturbance. Across the room, the defendant, David Hollis, a wealthy and well-connected businessman, sat with a carefully neutral expression, flanked by his highly paid legal team. He was accused of stealing millions meant for charity, and the evidence against him was thin but troubling. The prosecution, led by the determined and compassionate Elaine Morgan, was preparing to deliver her final arguments, when something entirely unexpected broke the usual order of the courtroom. Without warning, the heavy oak doors creaked open again, this time not to admit a lawyer, witness or bailiff, but a stray dog, thin, dusty, and clearly underfed. The dog stepped inside with quiet steps, its paws barely making a sound against the polished floor. People turned to look, confusion spreading like a wave. No one moved. The dog, small, ribs showing, but eyes sharp and full of something no one could yet name, walked with a kind of confidence not often seen in animals that have clearly suffered. It didn't bark at first, it didn't whine or growl. It simply walked to the center of the courtroom, turned its head slowly from one side to the other, and looked around, and then, breaking the tense silence like a pin in a balloon, it barked, sharp, clear, loud. One bark. Heads turned, eyes wide. Then a second bark, louder this time, with its gaze fixed directly at the defense table where Hollis sat. Hollis's hands twitched on the table. A third bark echoed through the high-ceilinged room, and then the dog sat, as though it had done what it came to do. Everyone was frozen. The judge didn't move. For the first time in her long career, Judge Campbell didn't know what to say. Reporters looked at one another, whispering questions. The defense team looked horrified. The prosecutor just stared. The courtroom's usual sense of structure and procedure had been replaced by an overwhelming silent question, "What is happening?" Then, one of the bailiffs stepped forward, trying to gently usher the dog away. But the dog didn't resist. It stayed exactly where it was. Its tail wagged faintly, slowly. It looked up at the judge. That's when someone noticed the collar. Around the dog's neck was a thin, worn leather collar, and hanging from it, glinting under the fluorescent lights, was a small rusty key. The bailiff paused. "Your Honor," he said hesitantly, his voice trembling slightly. "There's a key hanging from its collar." That single sentence changed everything. Judge Campbell leaned forward, squinting, and then stood. Her voice, though calm, was firm. "Secure the dog, inspect the collar, bring the key forward." The bailiff moved carefully, kneeling beside the dog. To everyone's astonishment, the animal didn't flinch. It sat still, looking at the defendant the entire time. As the bailiff unhooked the key and held it up, the judge leaned closer, curious and cautious. The small key was old and slightly rusted, but it had a distinct symbol etched into its head, an emblem that caught the attention of Prosecutor Morgan. She stood, her voice low but clear. "Your Honor, I believe that emblem matches a storage facility we've been investigating." Hollis shifted in his seat, his face pale now, beads of sweat visible on his forehead. The defense attorney stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous," he said, raising his voice. "A stray dog with a key. We're seriously considering this relevant to the trial." Judge Campbell held up her hand. "Sit down, Mr. Carter. This is highly irregular, but we will treat it with the seriousness it deserves. Miss Morgan, continue." Morgan approached the bailiff and inspected the key herself. Her expression changed. "Yes," she confirmed, "this is from the very storage unit we've suspected. Miss Hollis of using to hide financial records. We couldn't access it until now. This key may unlock everything. The courtroom buzzed. Everyone could feel that this was no ordinary moment. The stray dog, still sitting calmly in the center of the courtroom, had delivered a message no one could ignore. Judge Campbell nodded slowly. You have permission to pursue this immediately. Bailiff, escort Miss Morgan. The rest of the trial will be delayed until we have further information. As the bailiff and Morgan left with the key in hand, all eyes turned back to the dog, still there, still silent, still watching. Some people cried, some smiled in disbelief, others just sat, stunned, but no one questioned what had just happened. The dog had arrived in silence, and delivered something far louder than words, and though no one knew yet what the key would reveal, they all understood one thing: something bigger than coincidence had just walked into that courtroom on 4 legs, and a quiet mission. As the courtroom slowly recovered from the shock of a stray dog walking in and revealing a mysterious key, prosecutor Elaine Morgan stood frozen, her eyes fixed on the tiny, rusted object now resting in her palm. The courtroom still murmured with disbelief, reporters whispering fiercely among themselves, spectators glancing at one another in wonder, and Judge Campbell herself struggling to mask the astonishment etched into her usually stern face. Elaine turned the key over carefully, her thumb brushing against an emblem stamped into the metal, a small, almost faded logo. It was familiar. Her heart skipped a beat. She had seen that symbol before in the thick pile of documents and leads her team had gathered over the last few months in the investigation against David Hollis, the wealthy and well-connected businessman who now sat pale and squirming at the defense table. Elaine's eyes widened with realization. The emblem was from a private storage facility on the edge of town, a place they had suspected was used by Hollis to hide evidence, but hadn't been able to access due to legal red tape and lack of probable cause. But this key, delivered in the most bizarre and unexpected way imaginable, changed everything. She turned sharply to Judge Campbell. Your Honor, she said with calm urgency, I believe this key matches a storage facility we have been investigating as part of this case. With your permission, I would like to leave immediately with the bailiff and request an emergency search. The judge, still visibly shaken but regaining her composure, gave a small nod. Permission granted, she said. Proceed with caution and report back to this court. Elaine nodded, clutched the key tightly in her hand, and turned to leave the courtroom. The dog, now affectionately referred to as Justice by the courtroom audience, watched her go, his head tilting slightly, as if he understood the gravity of what he had done. As Elaine stepped into the cold morning air, the breeze hit her face and made her realize just how surreal this moment was. How had a stray dog become a pivotal player in the town's most high-stakes trial? How had this animal found a key that could change everything? She pushed those thoughts aside as she and the bailiff climbed into her car and drove quickly toward the storage facility. The car ride was silent, filled with tension and urgency. Elaine stared out the window, the key resting on her lap. It felt heavier now, not just in weight, but in meaning. She thought about the charities Hollis had stolen from, organizations that fed the hungry, housed the homeless, cared for sick children. He hadn't just stolen money, he had stolen hope, trust and future. If the key opened what she believed it might, they would finally have the proof to bring him to justice. When they arrived at the facility, the manager met them with a confused expression. You're here about a key, he asked, raising an eyebrow. Elaine showed him the key and the emblem. We believe it belongs to a unit rented under a false name. We need your cooperation. The manager, still doubtful but intrigued, led them down a long corridor of units. They stopped at one, with a serial number that matched the records tied to Hollis. Elaine took a deep breath, inserted the key into the lock, and turned. There was a soft click. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a dark and musty room. The bailiff flicked on his flashlight, and the beam swept across the interior rows of boxes, file cabinets, and stacks of ledgers. Elaine's heart pounded. She stepped inside and opened the first box. Inside were folders stuffed with documents, bank statements, wire transfer records, charity ledgers with missing amounts, and receipts for overseas transactions. Each paper felt like a confession. The more she dug, the clearer the picture became. Hollis had been funneling charity money into secret accounts, masking it with fake invoices and ghost organizations. This was the evidence they had been praying for, concrete, damning, and impossible to ignore. Elaine stood still for a moment, overwhelmed by the weight of it all. Her eyes stung, but she held back the tears. This was more than just a win in a courtroom. It was vindication for the countless people who had suffered quietly while Hollis walked free in tailored suits and smiled in front of cameras. She pulled out her phone and called the courthouse. "We have it," she said simply. "Everything we need." The dog was right. The dog was right. Those words echoed in her mind as she looked around the storage unit, her flashlight illuminating pages and pages of shameful proof. Back at the courthouse, word of the discovery began to spread. Reporters rushed to update their story. Spectators buzzed with disbelief and awe. Judge Campbell called for a recess, instructing court officers to prepare for the evidence to be formally presented. Hollis sat in silence, his face pale and expressionless, but his trembling hands gave him away. His lawyer whispered urgently to him, but there was nothing left to say. The courtroom had witnessed the beginning of the end for David Hollis, and it had all started with a dog that refused to stay silent. Justice, resting calmly in the care of a shelter volunteer, seemed at peace. He had done what no human could do. He had brought truth to a place built on words, lies, and silence. Elaine Morgan returned to the courthouse that evening, tired but full of purpose. As she entered the building with boxes of evidence in her arms, she paused for a moment and looked up at the sky. It was beginning to snow, soft flakes drifting down. She thought about the strangeness of life, how something as small and lost as a stray dog could change the world. She whispered softly to herself, "Sometimes justice doesn't speak. It just walks in when you least expect it." The moment the key clicked into the rusted lock and the storage unit door creaked open, a chill swept down Elaine Morgan's spine, not from the cold air inside, but from the heavy sense that they were about to uncover something terrible. As the dim light from the hallway spilled into the room, it revealed a narrow, dusty space, lined with metal shelves stacked with boxes, dozens of them, each one labeled with fake names, false companies, and coded numbers. Elaine stepped forward cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest, and pulled the top off one of the boxes. Inside she found rows of carefully organized folders, each one thick with paper, like confessions bound in silence. The first folder she opened contained bank statements, massive transfers between accounts with unfamiliar names, and offshore addresses. Some documents were stamped with logos of known children's charities, while others bore the forged signatures of directors, who upon closer inspection, didn't even exist. As she flipped through the papers, the reality of what David Hollis had done became painfully clear. He hadn't just skimmed money off the top. He had built an elaborate web of lies, creating fake organizations that pretended to care for orphaned children, children with cancer, disaster victims. He had accepted donations from good-hearted people, then siphoned those funds into his personal empire. Millions of dollars meant for the most vulnerable had been laundered through this maze of deceit and funneled into his businesses, his homes, his luxury cars. Each page was a slap in the face to every donor who had trusted him, every child who had gone without because Hollis had chosen greed over compassion. Elaine's hands shook as she moved from box to box, each one worse than the last. Photos of buildings that didn't exist, lists of fake employees, letters of thanks clearly written by the same hand using different names. It was a carefully crafted empire of fraud, built on stolen hope. The bailiff beside her called headquarters, requesting more officers and secure transport for the evidence. Elaine could barely speak. She just nodded and kept digging, driven by equal parts fury and heartbreak. Back in the courtroom, the atmosphere had shifted. Judge Campbell sat quietly, her eyes occasionally glancing toward the empty prosecution table, while murmurs began to rise among the crowd. The courtroom was no longer buzzing with anticipation, it was buzzing with anxiety. David Hollis, once composed and smug, now sat with a furrowed brow, his foot tapping nervously against the floor. He kept glancing at the doors, waiting, dreading what might come through them. His lawyer leaned over to whisper something, but Hollis barely nodded. For the first time since the trial began, the mask was slipping. He looked older now, his skin pale, his lips thin and pressed tight. The media had returned with more cameras, more reporters, and more questions. Justice, the dog who had brought the key, lay quietly in the corner, surrounded by shelter volunteers and a few curious court officials. His eyes, calm and knowing, stayed focused on the center of the courtroom. He didn't move, he didn't bark, he just watched, almost like he knew the world was about to shift. Hours later, Elaine returned to the courthouse with her team and several sealed boxes. As she entered, everyone turned to look, dozens of eyes following her every step. She walked straight to the judge, placed the first box on the bench, and opened it carefully. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear despite the exhaustion, "we found everything: names, amounts, locations, direct evidence of fraud, embezzlement, and identity forgery. Mr. Hollis created fake charities, stole donor money, and used it to fund his personal life. The documents also include a list of fake employees and forged letters from non-existent directors." The judge looked through the box briefly, her expression hardening with each paper she touched. She nodded. "Proceed." Elaine turned to the jury, lifting one of the papers. "This," she said, holding up a fake payroll for a children's hospice that never existed, "is how he built his fortune, on the backs of sick children and broken trust." The jury leaned in, eyes wide, emotions flickering from shock to anger. Hollis sank lower in his seat, his hands gripping the edge of the table. He no longer looked like a confident businessman, he looked like a man trapped with nowhere left to run. His lawyer requested a recess, but the judge denied it. "We will continue," she said firmly. The next hour was spent presenting document after document: photos of wire transfers, letters faked to gain grants, names of donors who had unknowingly supported a lie. The room was silent, heavy with disbelief. No one spoke, no one moved. Even the defense team sat motionless, and all the while Justice the dog remained in his corner, as still and calm as ever, like a statue carved in truth. Eventually Elaine approached the dog, knelt down and gently stroked his fur. "You did something no one else could," she whispered, her eyes full of gratitude. "You brought us to the truth." She turned back to the judge. "I request that this evidence be admitted officially, and that we call for a review of all charitable fraud cases related to the Hollis Foundation." The judge nodded again. "Granted." Hollis slumped in his chair. The courtroom had seen the evidence, they had heard the truth, and they had witnessed the unraveling of a man who had once fooled them all. That day, the dog who had walked into court from the streets became a symbol. He wasn't just a stray anymore, he was a guide, a quiet guardian, who had led them into the light. People left the courtroom that day with tears in their eyes, some from sorrow, some from awe. Justice had come, not from a lawyer's closing statement or a judge's ruling, but from a dog who had refused to stay silent. In the newspapers the next morning, the headlines didn't read "Hollis exposed" or "Millions recovered." Instead they simply said, "Justice found." After the courtroom erupted with the shock and power of what had just occurred, the mysterious arrival of a stray dog carrying a key that opened the door to a mountain of evidence against one of the wealthiest men in the city. The dog was gently taken to a local animal shelter for rest, safety, and care. Though many in the courthouse had already begun calling him Justice, a name that now carried the weight of a community's hope, the shelter staff was still curious about where he came from, who he might have belonged to, and how he had ended up in the middle of a courtroom at the exact right moment. The staff quickly noticed that this was no ordinary stray. Justice was calm, obedient, and unusually gentle. He didn't bark unnecessarily, didn't shy away from people, and seemed to have a quiet dignity about him that left everyone in awe. Children visiting the shelter hugged him without fear, and even the most hardened volunteers felt something peaceful in his presence. One evening, as a volunteer named Carla gently brushed his dusty coat, she discovered something everyone else had missed. Tucked beneath his worn collar was another, smaller tag, faded and half buried in his fur. Carefully, She cleaned it, and read the name etched into the metal. Beneath the name was an address, half worn but still readable. Carla's hands trembled as she showed the shelter director, who immediately called Prosecutor Elaine Morgan. When Elaine arrived at the shelter the next morning, she looked into Justice's, no, Max's eyes, and felt something stir in her heart. He wagged his tail slowly as if recognizing her. She knelt beside him, whispering softly, "You have a name, you have a home." With the tag clutched tightly in her hand, she drove across town to the address on the tag, a modest old house at the edge of the city, nestled between fading maple trees and cracked sidewalk. The place looked aged but well cared for, with small wind chimes swaying gently in the breeze, and an old brass mailbox still proudly standing by the gate. Elaine knocked on the door and waited. After a few moments, it creaked open to reveal an elderly man with weathered hands, kind eyes, and a slow but strong posture. He looked at her curiously. "Can I help you, miss?" he asked. Elaine smiled gently and held up the tag. "Sir, does the name Max mean anything to you?" The man's breath caught. He stared at the tag, his eyes filling instantly with tears. "Max, my Max," he whispered, his voice breaking. "He disappeared 3 months ago. I thought he was gone forever." Elaine gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "We found him, or rather, he found us, and he did something incredible." She then explained the entire story, the courtroom entrance, the key, the evidence, the quiet way Max had led them all to the truth. The man, whose name was Henry, stood silently for a long time, his eyes welling with pride and sorrow. "He was always special," he finally said. "I trained him myself. I was a locksmith. Retired now. Max would come with me on every job. He was smart, knew how to watch, how to wait. But one night, he slipped out during a storm. I searched for days. I put up posters. I cried like a child. And then, nothing. Until now." Elaine nodded, deeply moved. "Would you like to see him?" Henry didn't answer with words. He just grabbed his coat, locked the door and followed her with urgency in his steps that belied his age. Back at the shelter, Max was lying quietly by the window, watching the leaves outside fall slowly to the ground. When the door opened and Henry stepped in, the room seemed to hold its breath. Max turned, their eyes met. It was as if time stopped. Max stood slowly, tail low, ears perked. Henry whispered his name, voice thick with emotion. "Max, it's me, boy." And then Max ran, limping slightly, but fast and sure, straight into Henry's arms. The room filled with the sounds of quiet sobs and laughter, as man and dog were finally reunited. Max licked Henry's face, whined softly, and pressed his head into the old man's chest. Henry held him tightly, eyes closed, whispering thanks to 100 silent prayers he thought had gone unheard. Elaine stepped back, letting them have their moment. She felt a lump rise in her throat, her own eyes misty. This reunion wasn't just emotional, it was healing. It was the kind of moment that reminded her why she fought for truth, why she stood in courtrooms and took on men like Hullet. Because sometimes justice wasn't just about laws and punishments. Sometimes it was about finding what was lost. Later that day, as the shelter staff celebrated the reunion and news spread across the town, reporters gathered outside to share the incredible story. A lost dog named Max, who somehow wandered back into the life of his owner, while exposing one of the city's darkest frauds. Henry agreed to speak to the media, holding Max in his lap. He spoke gently, not seeking attention, but simply honoring the dog who had brought light into the darkest places. "He's not just a dog," he said. "He's hope on 4 legs." Elaine couldn't stop thinking about how Max had found his way back, not just to Henry, but into the very heart of a courtroom. She looked at the old tag again, then at the key that had opened the storage unit, and she smiled. Somehow, Max had carried not just metal, but meaning. He had bridged a gap between loss and truth, silence and justice. And now, with Henry by his side again, Max had found his peace. But his journey wasn't over. In the days that followed, People began calling the shelter asking about Max, about the case, about how they could help. Elaine received letters from children, thanking Max for helping protect the kids like us. Donations poured into the shelter. A mural of Max was painted on the wall outside, with words that would stay in the hearts of many. Sometimes the smallest voice speaks the loud. Max, the dog who had once been lost, had become a symbol of truth, love, and the extraordinary power of being in the right place at the right time, with the right heart. Henry sat in his quiet, sunlit living room, Max resting peacefully at his feet, as the weight of the past began to settle over him like a blanket he hadn't felt in years. Since the day Max returned, their bond had been unbreakable, but the mystery of the key around Max's neck lingered in Henry's mind like a puzzle he had once known how to solve. He sat at his old wooden desk and pulled open a drawer filled with years of receipts, notes and records from his time as a locksmith. The paper was yellowed and the ink faded, but his hands still remembered where everything was. As he flipped through the pile he paused, frowning. There it was, a handwritten invoice from nearly 2 years ago, the name David Hollis. A chill ran down Henry's spine. He remembered now. Hollis had come into his shop, wearing an expensive suit and sunglasses, speaking in a soft, polished voice. He hadn't said much, only that he needed a key made for a high-security storage unit. The job hadn't seemed unusual at the time, just another rich man with another secret. Henry made the key, logged the order, and moved on. But now, holding that old invoice and looking at Max, he realized the key on the dog's collar wasn't just any key. It was that key, the same one Hollis had requested. The key Max had somehow carried into the courtroom that fateful morning. Henry sat back in his chair, overwhelmed by the realization. Max must have found it, maybe sniffed it out from the workshop, maybe during one of his walks or his wandering during the storm. And for reasons Henry couldn't explain, Max hadn't just carried it around, he had brought it to where it mattered, to the courtroom, to Morgan, to justice. The next morning, Henry walked into the district attorney's office with Max by his side and the old invoice in his coat pocket. Elaine Morgan looked up, surprised but welcoming. "Mr. Henry," she said, standing, "is everything all right?" Henry nodded slowly. "I believe I have something you need to see." He handed her the paper and sat down, explaining everything. How Hollis had come to him for a key, how Max had vanished during a terrible storm, and how, months later, Max came back with that very key. Elaine's eyes widened as she studied the invoice, her heart racing. This wasn't just testimony, it was a direct link between Hollis and the hidden storage unit, and Henry, quiet and thoughtful, had become an essential witness in one of the most important cases of her career. "Would you be willing to testify?" she asked gently. Henry looked down at Max, then back at her. "For him? For the truth?" "Absolutely." A week later, the courtroom was packed once again. The public couldn't stop talking about the dog who had brought down a powerful man, and now the man who had once made the key that unlocked everything was about to speak. Henry took the stand slowly, carefully, holding a small folder of papers and wearing a suit that hadn't seen sunlight in years. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice was steady as he began to speak. "My name is Henry Whitmore. I was a locksmith for 40 years, he said. He told them about his quiet shop, about the day Hollis walked in and requested the key. He was polite, Henry continued, said it was for personal use. I didn't ask questions, didn't seem like my place, but I kept a copy of every order." He pulled out the invoice and handed it to the court clerk. Elaine guided him gently through the event. "And this key," she said, holding up the now famous one, retrieved from Max's collar. "Do you recognize it?" Henry nodded. "Yes, that's the key I made for Mr. Hollis." The courtroom murmured. Henry looked at the jury, then at the judge. "When Max came home after being missing for months, he had this around his neck. I didn't realize it at first, but when I saw it again, everything came back." He paused, emotion catching in his throat. "He brought it back to me, or maybe he brought it to where it needed to be." The judge leaned forward, deeply moved. The jury was silent, hanging on every word. "Max? He's not just a pet, he's family." And somehow he knew where to go, what to do. He led everyone to the truth. Elaine looked at Henry, then addressed the court. "Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't just a coincidence. This isn't luck. This is evidence. Mr. Hollis used his power and wealth to hide crimes, but it was an ordinary man and an extraordinary dog Who revealed them? Hollis sat motionless, his face now a mask of shame. His lawyer looked defeated, thumbing through empty notes, knowing there was no longer a defense strong enough to stand against the storm of truth that had come, quietly, faithfully, on four legs and in honest words. As Henry stepped down from the witness stand, Max wagged his tail softly from the corner. Henry smiled and nodded at him. "We did good, boy," he whispered. "You brought us all back to where we belong." The courtroom, once cold and clinical, now felt warm, alive with something rare, faith in the good, the real, the simple truth that had been nearly lost in noise and power. Max had once wandered alone in a storm, lost and afraid. But that journey had led him not just back to Henry but to justice, and in doing so he helped remind an entire town that the smallest actions can reveal the biggest truth. In the days that followed Henry's powerful testimony, the air in the courtroom became heavier with emotion, and the attention surrounding the case grew louder. But beneath all the headlines, behind all the stares, one truth pulsed quietly, yet powerfully. This wasn't just about ledgers and keys, or even about the man who had stolen so much under the cover of wealth and respectability. It was about a dog who had done something no one could explain, something that couldn't be written off as coincidence. Elaine Morgan knew she needed to go deeper, to make the jury feel, not just understand, the weight of what had happened. So on the fourth morning after the discovery of the storage unit and Henry's appearance in court, she entered the courtroom with a quiet, unwavering expression and a new strategy. The jury had already heard the facts, the transactions, the fake charities, the forged documents. They had seen the bank records, the storage invoices, the key that linked everything together. But now Elaine wanted them to feel what this case truly meant, and more importantly, what Justice Max meant. She began calmly, standing before the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've shown you numbers, we've shown you paperwork, but today, I want to show you something else." She turned toward the screen and played a video, quiet footage from the courtroom's security cameras, showing the exact moment Max had entered on that unforgettable morning. The jurors watched, mesmerized, as the small thin dog walked silently into the courtroom, looked around, barked 3 times, and then sat still in the very center of the room. The video paused on Max's calm, watchful eyes. Elaine faced the jury again. "Look at him," she said, her voice soft. "He didn't whimper, he didn't run, he didn't cause chaos. He walked in, carrying the truth." She let the silence hang in the room. He had a key made by Henry Whitmore, a key requested by David Hollis, a key that opened a storage unit filled with the truth. And somehow, this dog found it. Not just found it, but brought it here, right here. Hollis's attorney quickly stood, objecting. "Your Honor, the prosecutor is turning this into a fable. She's asking the jury to assign intent and understanding to a dog." The judge raised her hand. "Objection noted. Continue, Miss Morgan." Elaine nodded, her tone still calm, but fierce with conviction. "No, I am not asking you to believe this dog understood embezzlement, or legal codes, or tax fraud. I'm asking you to see something deep. This isn't about assigning him human thoughts. It's about recognizing what he represents: trust, loyalty, justice. He found the key, he carried it, and he brought it to the place where it mattered. That isn't a fable, that happened." She turned to face Hollis, who looked down at his hands, unable to meet her gaze. David Hollis used Henry to make a key to hide his crimes, and when he had what he wanted, he threw the key away, literally and figuratively. He discarded the evidence, discarded Henry's trust, and likely discarded Max too. And yet, that very same dog, that so-called stray, did what Hollis never did. He brought something back, not for himself, but for all of us. One of the jurors wiped a tear from her cheek. Elaine continued, holding up the now famous key. "This key is metal, it's simple, but in this trial, it became a symbol, a piece of a puzzle that only Max could place. Without him, we would not have opened that door. Without him, we would still be wondering, still guessing, still hoping for a break. but that break came on 4 legs. She paused again, then walked slowly across the room, to where Max lay beside a volunteer, near the front bench. She knelt and gently stroked his back. "Some might say he's just a dog," she said quietly, "but he's also a witness, a messenger, a symbol." He walked into this courtroom, with no voice, no lawyer, no name on the record, but he spoke louder than any testimony we've heard. The courtroom was utterly silent. Elaine returned to her seat, the screen still frozen on the image of Max, sitting so still and proud in the middle of that now historic moment. The judge called for a short recess, and as the jury filed out, several glanced down at Max, their expressions soft and reflective. During the break, reporters outside the courthouse shared the emotional scene with the world, calling it one of the most remarkable moments in any courtroom they had ever witnessed. People across the city, and soon across the country, began to follow Max's story. Letters flooded the courthouse, messages of support, drawings from children, poems, and thank you notes, addressed not to the lawyers or the judge, but to the dog who had simply shown up when no one else could. Back inside, the trial resumed, but nothing felt the same. Hollis's lawyer struggled to refocus the court's attention on numbers and legalities, but the jury had already connected the facts with a story that reached beyond paper. They had felt something, and in a courtroom, that was something you could never ignore. Elaine later added one last gentle reminder in her closing argument: justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it walks in quietly, unnoticed, without a badge or a voice, but when it shows up, you know, you feel it, and you don't forget it. Max remained still that day, as always. He didn't need to bark, he didn't need to run, he had already done what he came to do, and the truth, thanks to him, could no longer be hidden. In that courtroom, in the hearts of that jury, and in the eyes of a nation watching, justice had been seen, and heard, and remembered. Just when it seemed the courtroom was turning fully toward the truth, and Elaine Morgan had the jury leaning in her favor, a sudden shadow fell across the case, like a cloud dimming a hopeful sunrise. It came quietly, just a soft ping on her laptop, late one night in her office, long after the courthouse had gone still and Max the dog, who had brought them so far, was resting peacefully at the nearby shelter. The email was brief, anonymous, and chilling in its implications. Your witness with 4 legs, check his history. He once belonged to Hollis, trained, discarded, now conveniently returned. Elaine's heart clenched. She reread the message again and again. There was no name, no return address, just a tip, and a cruel suggestion that the dog everyone was calling a hero had once been trained and owned by the very man he had helped bring down. The thought made her stomach twist. What if Max, Justice, as so many now called him, wasn't just a wandering soul guided by instinct and purpose? What if, instead, this was something darker? What if the dog had been part of Hollis's world, trained in his service, and then somehow programmed or led to do what he had done? Could the defense use this to claim manipulation? Elaine sat in silence, the glow of the computer screen casting long shadows on the walls, her mind spinning with doubts. The next morning she drove straight to Henry's house, Max's quiet sanctuary since his return. She found the old locksmith in his backyard, sanding an old bench while Max lay nearby in the sun. Henry greeted her with a soft smile, but it faded when he saw the worry in her eyes. Something's wrong, he said gently, setting down his tools. Elaine nodded, and showed him the message. Henry read it slowly, his jaw tightening, his eyes growing cloudy with concern. Then he sat down heavily, calling Max over with a quiet whistle. The dog padded over, sat beside Henry, and rested his head on the old man's knee. Henry ran his hand slowly over Max's head. I didn't want to believe it, he said finally, voice thick with emotion. But it might be true. Elaine stayed silent, letting him speak at his own pace. I remember now, Henry said, when Hollis came to me for that key. It wasn't the first time I'd seen him. A year earlier, he brought in a dog, said it needed special training. Not a pet, he said. This one's for security. He paused, looking down at Max. I didn't think much of it at the time, but when Max came back to me after the storm, I thought he seemed familiar. It's the eyes. I couldn't place it, but now, he looked up at Elaine, his eyes filled with sorrow. I think Max might have been that dog. I think Hollis trained him, and when he didn't meet expectations, he tossed him aside like trash. Elaine swallowed the lump in her throat. Do you think the defense will try to use this? Henry nodded. They'll twist it, say the dog was sent, that this was all part of some plan, that Max is just a trained tool. The idea hurt more than she expected. Max had become a symbol not just to the courtroom, but to her. He had reminded her of why she chose to be a prosecutor, to protect those who had no voice. But now, even his intentions were under question. She watched Max roll onto his side, enjoying the sun, completely unaware of the storm building around him once more. But Henry said softly, even if he was Hollis's dog, look where he ended up, look what he did. He found the key, he brought it to the courtroom, not to Hollis, not to anyone else, to you. That's not training, that's choice. Elaine looked at him, her eyes shine. You really believe that? Henry nodded. I know this dog, I know what's in his heart. With that reassurance, Elaine left to prepare for the battle ahead. In court the next day, the defense launched their counterattack. Hollis's lawyer stood confidently and declared, the dog you've all praised, this symbol of truth, was once owned by my client. He was trained in obedience, used in security, and discarded when he failed. Now, he conveniently returns, and plays the role of hero. He smirked, and let the words hang in the air, trying to sow doubt in the minds of the jury. Elaine stood slowly, walked to the front of the courtroom, and said, yes, Max was once owned by David Hollis. That much is likely true, but what matters isn't who owned him. What matters is what he did on his own. When Hollis threw him away, he survived, he wandered, he suffered, and when the time came, he didn't go back to the man who hurt him. He came to us, to you, to this courtroom, with a key that opened a door no one else could. That's not obedience, that's something far more powerful. She looked at the jury, letting the words sink in. That's instinct, that's heart, that's justice. The jury listened, silent and thoughtful. Max lay quietly, tail gently wagging, eyes calm. In the world of evidence and logic, some things could not be explained, some things were simply felt, and in that room, in that moment, everyone felt it. The truth still stood strong, despite the shadows of the past. A twist in the tale. Hollis's team, feeling the pressure of the trial, and desperate to turn the tides in their favor, sought to exploit every possible angle they could find. When they stumbled upon a clip of justice in what seemed to be a moment of aggression, they seized the opportunity without hesitation. They took that brief segment, carefully edited it to distort the context, and released it publicly as proof that justice was dangerous, unpredictable, and a threat to everyone around him. The edited video quickly spread, igniting fear and doubt among the public, and most importantly, the jury. In every corner of the courtroom, whispers began to rise. Those who had once believed in Justice's innocence started to question him. The image of a protector slowly morphed into that of a menace. Faces grew worried. Hope began to flicker like a candle struggling against a strong wind. But Morgan, ever vigilant and driven by her conviction to reveal the truth, refused to let this manipulated narrative take root. She knew something didn't feel right about that video, and deep inside, she trusted justice more than the deception spun by Hollis's team. She worked tirelessly behind the scenes, retracing steps, reaching out to sources, and uncovering leads that others overlooked or dismissed. Days of relentless searching finally bore fruit when she discovered the full, unedited footage of that fateful moment. What she found was nothing like the edited video had shown. In the full footage, Justice wasn't lashing out in anger or aggression. Instead, he was acting with swift and selfless courage, placing himself between a child and a looming danger. The scene revealed a protector's heart beating fiercely, shielding innocence from harm, without hesitation or fear. Morgan's heart raced as she realized the power this truth held. She knew that if the jury could see this, the misunderstanding and the attempt to discredit justice would crumble. Standing before the courtroom, with every eye fixed on her, Morgan presented the real video. The moment the footage played, an overwhelming silence filled the room. The jury watched, captivated, as Justice's true character unfolded on the screen. The courtroom gasped collectively, the weight of the truth sinking deep into every soul present. Justice wasn't the dangerous figure Hollis's team had painted him to be. He was brave, noble, and compassionate, a guardian in the truest sense of the word. The contrast between the edited clip and the full footage couldn't have been starker, and the revelation struck a chord that no one could ignore. The judge looked on with a mixture of surprise and relief, while the jury members exchanged glances, their doubt replaced by newfound respect and understanding. Tears glistened in the eyes of those who had feared the worst, their emotions touched by the courage Justice had shown in protecting someone so vulnerable. This moment became a turning point in the trial, and in the hearts of everyone involved. The attempt by Hollis's team to manipulate the truth and turn the courtroom against Justice had failed spectacularly. Instead of weakening him, it had revealed the depth of his integrity and the strength of his spirit. Morgan's unyielding determination to uncover and present the truth became a beacon of hope, inspiring those who had almost lost faith. The courtroom, once heavy with tension and suspicion, now felt lighter, filled with an energy of justice restored. This twist in the tale was not merely a legal victory, it was an emotional triumph, a reminder that truth and courage can shine brightest in the darkest moment. The people watching felt a profound connection to Justice's story, understanding that appearances can be deceiving, and that true bravery often goes unseen until it is needed most. As the trial continued, the atmosphere shifted, with those present now more willing to listen, to believe and to support a cause grounded in honesty and protection, rather than fear and misunderstanding. This chapter served as a powerful testament to the resilience of truth and the importance of standing firm against falsehoods, especially when they threaten to tarnish the character of those who stand for what is right. Morgan's actions showed that sometimes it takes one brave voice to change the course of an entire narrative, to restore faith where doubt had taken root, and to bring light to a story overshadowed by lie. The emotional weight of this moment stayed with everyone long after the trial moved forward, a reminder that justice is not just about laws and evidence, but about seeing beyond the surface to the heart of what truly matters. This part of the journey deepened the bond between Justice and those who believed in him, strengthening their resolve to fight for what was right no matter how difficult the path ahead might be. The courtroom was a stage where fear had tried to dictate the story, but truth and courage wrote the final lines, leaving a lasting impression that would echo beyond the walls of that room and into the lives of all who heard it. The dog's history. The courtroom was heavy with anticipation, as the defense team unveiled what they believed would further damage Justice's reputation. They presented detailed training records, showing that Justice had once been a member of an elite professional canine unit, trained to serve, protect, and obey without question. On the surface, this seemed like a testament to Justice's abilities and discipline, but the defense twisted this fact to suggest that Justice was nothing more than a tool, replaceable, expendable, and ultimately dangerous when he failed to meet expectations. They implied that Justice's past was marked by failure, that he was no longer fit to be trusted or cared for. But Morgan, with her sharp insight and deep understanding of Justice's true story, refused to let this narrative stand unchallenged. She turned the defense's own evidence against them, peeling back the layers to reveal a far darker truth beneath the surface. She shared emails and messages exchanged behind closed doors, cold, cruel words from Hollis, the very person who was supposed to have cared for Justice as both a partner and a protector. The courtroom fell silent as Morgan read aloud Hollis's callous descriptions, where he referred to Justice as useless after one mission didn't go as planned. These words were not just harsh criticisms, they were acts of betrayal from a man who had once trained alongside Justice, once relied on him, and now was willing to discard him like a broken tool. The emotional impact hit everyone present like a wave. The jury, the judge, and even the spectators were struck by the cruelty that Justice had endured, not just from the accusations made against him, but from the very person who should have stood by his side. Morgan's revelation painted a vivid picture of abandonment and heartbreak. Justice was not simply a dog who had failed, He was a loyal companion, a brave soldier who had been thrown away without mercy or gratitude. The courtroom's mood shifted from suspicion to sorrow as the jury realized that the damage inflicted on Justice went far beyond the allegations in the case. This was a story of loyalty betrayed, of a bond broken by neglect and disdain. Morgan's voice softened but grew stronger with conviction as she told the story of Justice's past, of the rigorous training, the missions they had faced together, and the moments of courage that defined him. She reminded everyone that Justice was more than just a trained K9. He was a being with heart and spirit, who deserved respect, care, and love. The defense's attempt to paint Justice as dangerous was exposed for what it was, a cruel effort to hide their own failures and to avoid facing the truth about Hollis's character. The emails revealed a man who not only hurt people through his actions, but also threw away those who had once been loyal to him, whether human or animal, when they no longer served his purposes. The jury's eyes glistened with emotion, many moved to tears by the story unfolding before them. The injustice of Justice's abandonment resonated deeply, touching something fundamental about trust, loyalty, and the pain of being cast aside. Morgan's heartfelt presentation reminded everyone that Justice's past was not a record of failure, but a history of bravery and sacrifice, marred only by the cruelty of a man who failed to honor that bond. As the courtroom absorbed this revelation, the tide of the trial shifted again. Sympathy for Justice grew stronger, and the resolve to see justice done became more urgent. Morgan had not only defended a dog, but had brought to light the story of a soul betrayed, and in doing so she gave a voice to those who cannot speak for themselves. This chapter in the trial was a powerful reminder that true courage and loyalty are often tested in the harshest of circumstances, and that those who stand for what is right must fight not only against injustice, but against the darkness of neglect and betrayal. The emotional weight of Justice's story filled the room, uniting all who heard it in a shared understanding of the pain of abandonment and the strength it takes to survive it. In this moment, Justice was more than a subject in a courtroom. He was a symbol of resilience, a testament to the power of hope, even in the face of profound hurt. The defense's attempt to diminish him had backfired, revealing instead the depths of Hollis's cruelty and the true spirit of justice. The courtroom left that day changed, carrying with them the memory of a dog who had been more than a partner. He had been a hero betrayed, a survivor whose story was finally being heard and understood. The silent witness. The courtroom was thick with tension as Morgan introduced the animal behaviorist, a quiet but resolute figure who carried with him a profound understanding of creatures like Justice, animals whose instincts and emotions often speak spur than human words. Everyone in the room, from the jury to the judge, leaned in as the expert began to explain, in calm and clear terms, what had truly guided Justice's actions throughout the events in question. He described how Justice was no ordinary dog reacting out of chaos or confusion, but a being whose every movement was shaped by years of rigorous training, combined with an extraordinary sense of loyalty and instinct. The behaviorist spoke of Justice's ability to read human emotions, to sense danger before it appeared, and to act with a deliberate purpose that went beyond mere reflex. This was a dog who carried within him a silent wisdom, an unspoken understanding of his role as protector and companion. Morgan watched intently as the jury's expressions shifted. Skepticism softened into curiosity, curiosity into respect, and respect into something like belief. The defense, sensing the danger this testimony posed to their narrative, tried to undermine the behaviorist's credibility, twisting his words to suggest bias or exaggeration. But their attempts fell flat. The jury could see through the smoke and mirrors. They sensed the truth beneath the surface. Justice was not a reckless beast, but a brave soul who had acted with heart and purpose. The room seemed to hold its breath as the behaviorist recounted specific examples of Justice's actions, how his instincts had saved lives before, how his loyalty had never wavered, even when abandoned and misunderstood. He explained how Justice's behavior was consistent with a dog who had faced trauma yet remained committed to protecting those he cared for. The defense's arguments, which had painted Justice as dangerous and unpredictable, were exposed as hollow. The jury's eyes glistened with emotion as they began to understand the depth of Justice's silent testimony, the unspoken language of courage, loyalty and love. Morgan felt a swell of hope rising within her. She had fought long and hard to bring this truth to light, and now watching the jury respond, she knew that fate had indeed brought justice back for a reason. The dog's story was no longer one of accusation and fear, but one of redemption and purpose. This moment in the trial was a turning point, not just legally but emotionally, a testament to the power of understanding and empathy. The silent witness had spoken volumes, and those words touched the hearts of everyone present. The courtroom was transformed from a place of judgment to a space where truth and compassion began to heal wounds that had long been hidden. As the behaviorist concluded, a profound silence settled over the room, filled with unspoken acknowledgement of the journey justice had endured. Morgan's eyes met those of the jury, seeing in them a quiet but growing conviction. Justice's actions were no longer a mystery or a threat. They were a powerful declaration of his spirit and heart. This chapter in the story reminded everyone that sometimes the loudest voices are those who cannot speak, and that the truth often lies in the smallest, most silent gesture. The room was beginning to believe in justice's cause, in the idea that every being, no matter how silent, has a story worth hearing and honoring. It was a deeply emotional moment, one that transcended the boundaries of law and touched the core of human and animal connection. As the trial moved forward, the energy in the courtroom had changed, hope was rekindled, and a new sense of purpose had taken hold. Morgan knew the road ahead would still be challenging, but with this testimony they had taken a giant step toward justice, not just for a dog, but for the meaning of loyalty and love itself. The silent witness had finally found his voice, and with it, the power to change hearts and minds forever. The final blow. The courtroom buzzed with tense anticipation as Morgan prepared to deliver the most damning evidence yet against Hollis. Evidence that would not only shatter his defense, but expose the dark underbelly of his flow and illegal actions. She revealed detailed payment records that painted a shocking picture, proof that Hollis was deeply involved in the illegal trading of trained animals, dogs like Justice, who were meant to serve and protect, but instead were exploited for dangerous and illicit purposes. The documents showed a trail of secret payments, exchanges and deals that linked Hollis to a shadowy world where animals were nothing more than commodities, tools to be bought, sold and discarded without a second thought. As these cold, undeniable facts were laid bare, the courtroom was gripped by a collective gasp. The idea that the man who once commanded loyalty and respect had been using these dogs as pawns in a cruel game stirred a powerful emotional response in everyone present. Then adding a human face to the cruelty, Clara, a former employee who had worked closely with Hollis and the animals, took the stand. Her testimony was both heartbreaking and infuriating. She spoke with quiet courage about the harsh realities she had witnessed, how Hollis had used dogs like Justice for smuggling operations, how he had pushed these loyal animals to the edge, and how he had abandoned them without mercy when they no longer served his purposes. Clara's words carried the weight of personal experience, making the courtroom feel the pain of betrayal these dogs had endured. She confirmed what many feared: Justice had been left to die, forsaken in the cold and darkness after a failed mission, discarded as useless by the very man who should have protected him. The room was silent except for Clara's steady voice as she recounted the moment she first saw Justice, abandoned but still alive, a living testament to the cruelty of Hollis's action. This was a dog who had survived against all odds, whose return was not just a coincidence, but a powerful symbol of resilience and truth. Morgan's heart pounded as she watched the jury absorb every word, every detail of this painful revelation. The emotional impact was overwhelming, faces softened with empathy, some eyes filled with tears, as the true extent of the betrayal and injustice became impossible to ignore. This final blow wasn't just legal evidence, it was a human story of cruelty exposed, of loyalty and love trampled under greed and callousness, and of a dog who had become a beacon of hope in the darkest of times. Justice's survival was a miracle, a sign that even in the face of abandonment and danger, courage and truth could prevail. As Clara's testimony concluded, Morgan stepped back, feeling a profound mixture of sorrow and determination. She knew that this chapter in the trial had laid bare the heart of the matter. Hollis was a man who had not only broken laws but had shattered lives, human and animal alike. The courtroom, once filled with tension and suspicion, was now alive with a sense of moral clarity and the urgent need for justice. The jury's expressions told the story. They understood that the man before them was not just guilty of crimes on paper, but of a deeper betrayal of trust and compassion. This was a pivotal moment in the trial, one that brought the narrative full circle and gave voice to the silent witnesses, the animals who could not speak but whose stories were now being heard loud and clear. The emotional weight of this revelation settled over everyone, a powerful reminder of the cost of greed and cruelty and the strength it takes to stand up and fight for what is right. Justice's journey from abandonment to heroism was no longer just a tale of survival but a symbol of hope and redemption that inspired all who had witnessed it. The final blow had been struck, and with it came the promise that those who had been hurt would not be forgotten, that the truth would shine through, and that justice at last would be served. The verdict. The atmosphere in the courtroom was thick with emotion as Lagan stood to deliver her final speech, a moment that would seal the fate of the trial and honor the incredible journey of justice. The dog, who had become so much more than just a witness, he had become a symbol of truth and courage. With a steady voice filled with conviction and heart, Morgan began, "Justice didn't just bring us a key, he brought us the truth." Those words hung in the air, simple yet profound, capturing the essence of the entire case. Justice was not merely an animal caught in the crossfire of human greed and cruelty. He was a silent hero, whose loyalty and bravery had uncovered a dark web of lies and abuse. The courtroom, filled with jurors, spectators, and those who had followed the trial closely, listened intently, the weight of Morgan's words settling deep into their hearts. She recounted the evidence once more, the videos, the emails, the testimonies that had revealed the true nature of Hollis and the cruel world he operated in. She spoke about Justice's unwavering loyalty, his instinct to protect, and the heartbreak of betrayal he had endured. Morgan reminded everyone that Justice's actions had been driven by love and courage, not aggression or danger. The defense's attempts to twist the narrative had been exposed as desperate lies, and now, standing on the brink of justice, Morgan appealed to the jury's sense of right and empathy. When Hollis took the stand, the contrast was stark. The man who had once commanded control now appeared diminished, unable to defend himself against the overwhelming tide of truth and evidence. His face was pale, his eyes avoiding the gaze of those he had wronged. The courtroom watched silently as the weight of his actions settled on him like a heavy shadow. There was no fiery defense, no convincing argument, just the quiet unraveling of a man who had been exposed. The jury deliberated, the minutes stretching long with tension and hope. Finally, the moment arrived. The foreperson stood, voice clear and resolute, announcing the verdict guilty on all counts. A wave of relief and emotion swept through the room. Henry, who had stood by Justice's side through every twist and turn, broke down in tears, wrapping his arms around Justice in a tight, grateful hug. The dog, who had endured so much pain and hardship, seemed to sense the victory in the air, his eyes shining with the quiet dignity of a true hero. Morgan's chest swelled with pride as she watched this powerful reunion. She had fought tirelessly to give Justice the voice he deserved, and now, justice had finally been served. The courtroom erupted in cheers, not just for the verdict, but for the dog who had made it all possible. People rose to their feet, applauding and celebrating the triumph of truth, loyalty, and courage. The story that had begun with fear and doubt had ended with hope and vindication. Justice had brought more than a key to the case. He had unlocked a deeper understanding of what it means to fight for what is right, to stand by those who cannot speak, and to never give up on the truth. As the cheers filled the room, Morgan felt a profound sense of fulfillment. This was not just a legal victory, it was a testament to the unbreakable bond between humans and animals, and a reminder that even in the darkest moments, light can shine through when we choose to believe in justice. The journey had been long and hard, filled with moments of despair and triumph, but in the end, the verdict was clear, and the message was stronger than ever. Loyalty, courage, and truth will always prevail. Justice's legacy. After the intense and emotional trial had come to a close, and the courtroom had quieted from its cheers, Justice's story began a new chapter, one filled not with fear or pain, but with hope, honor, and healing. The once abandoned dog who had faced unimaginable betrayal and danger was now a celebrated local hero, a symbol of courage and loyalty that resonated deeply within the hearts of everyone in the town. The community, moved by Justice's bravery and the powerful truth he had helped uncover, came together to honor him in a way that would ensure his legacy lived on far beyond the courtroom walls. They organized a parade, colorful and joyous, where children waved flags and families gathered to cheer as Justice walked proudly alongside Henry, his devoted companion. The air was filled with laughter, music, and the warm embrace of unity, as the townspeople declared a special Justice Day, a day set aside each year to remember the dog whose silent courage had changed their lives. It was a celebration not just of justice, but of all animals who suffer in silence, waiting for someone to hear their story and stand up for them. Inspired by the impact Justice had made, Morgan founded a program called Justice's Legacy. This initiative focused on helping abandoned and abused animals find safe, loving homes, offering them a second chance much like Justice had been given. Morgan poured her heart and energy into this work, determined to create a world where no animal would be left behind or forgotten. The program grew quickly, touching the lives of countless dogs, cats, and other animals who had once faced neglect and fear. Morgan's work became a beacon of hope, a testament to how one dog's journey could inspire change on a much larger scale. Meanwhile, Henry and Justice returned to the quiet comfort of the farm, a place that had become their sanctuary. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, Henry looked down at his loyal friend with deep gratitude and love. The hardships they had endured together, the pain, the fear, the long fight for justice, were all reflected in that single peaceful moment. With a voice thick with emotion, Henry whispered, "You saved me, boy. You gave me life again." Justice, sensing the warmth and sincerity in Henry's words, wagged his tail gently, content and happy just to be home, to be safe, and to be loved. This ending was not just about a dog and his owner, it was about the enduring power of loyalty, the healing that comes from compassion, and the hope that even the most broken among us can find a way to shine. Justice's Legacy was more than a program or a parade. It was a reminder to the world that every life matters, that every silent witness deserves a voice, and that the bond between humans and animals can inspire courage and change that lasts for generations. The story of justice, from abandonment to heroism, from betrayal to celebration, had touched countless hearts and transformed a community. It was a legacy written not just in legal documents or headlines, but in the everyday acts of kindness and love that followed. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, casting a gentle glow over the farm, Henry and Justice sat together in quiet companionship, both knowing that their journey had made a difference far beyond what they could have imagined. The world was a little kinder, a little braver, and a little more hopeful because of Justice, the dog who taught everyone that true loyalty never fades, and that sometimes the smallest acts of courage can leave the biggest legacy.